Hey there guys, welcome back to another episode of Mortal Realms Monday, where today we will be painting this little guy, Crawlocke the Jailor, from issue 38 of the Mortal Realms magazine. So without further ado, let's get to it. So first of all, we're going to take some Nighthaunt Gloom here and putting in a few drops using the paintbrush from the pot, so probably about 5 or 6 drops there of the Nighthaunt Gloom. I'm now going to add some Lamian Medium. And what we're trying to do here is make a thinner version of this Nighthaunt Gloom, so that it applies a little bit more, thin, a little bit more watery. And what we're going to do is build up the layers so we can get from that white at the bottom and the tips of the Jailor up to that darker Nighthaunt Gloom towards the top. So now, just to thin it a little bit more, I'm just adding a few drops of water, again using the brush, so about 4 drops there. Not exactly an accurate method, but you can see the sort of consistency that I'm going for. Using the plastic lid here, you can see how the paint wants to sort of pull away and not quite sit, whereas obviously thicker paint would sit a bit more. So grabbing our Jailor here and starting at the bottom, all I'm going to do is apply this pretty much all over, obviously trying to put it at the top, to the top. Now obviously the problem with this is gravity is going to want to make it all go down to the bottom. So what I've got on the bottom of my guy here is a magnet, a 6mm by 3mm magnet glued to the bottom, and not only is that useful for my magnetic storage system, but also it means that I can mount this guy upside down so that gravity works by pulling all of that paint to the top of the model. Obviously it'll be upside down, so it would then be the bottom. So the magnet, I've got my microphone arm here, and I'll just clip them to the bottom of that whilst the paint dries. Now if you haven't got that, you could do a similar thing, maybe with some double-sided tape, or if you've got some like crocodile clips or something like that, you could clip it. Otherwise you'll have to get a bit creative, maybe some blue tack and just the underside of a shelf or something, and just tack it up just so that it dries. If not, then try not to have so much pooling on there. Just wick away excess with the brush, and it will just take you a few more layers to get that darker top. Obviously with the pooling, that's going to go towards the top and it will darken his back up a lot more than it would without the pooling. So like I say, cover all the model with this, let it dry, and we'll do this a good 3 or 4 times, starting a little further up the model each time and allowing that to dry fully before carrying on with the next layer. So I'll get on with this and then we'll come back for the next step. Right, so while the main body of the Jailor is drying, I'm just moving on to the arms here and doing the exact same method, using some of that wash, letting it pool into the knuckles and in the palms there. And then what I'll do is wick away the excess with the brush, just to get it a little bit paler. I don't want as much of the gloom on here, just enough to get those shadows, but I still want his arms being quite sort of ghostly white. So I've rinsed the brush off this now with a clean brush, and I'm just wicking away some of that excess, but leaving a little bit of that bluish stain there. Now obviously I've primed the model with white paint. This was hand painted on by brush, as I didn't want to paint the base with a spray can. Would have obviously covered the entire model. So for all of the Jailor, the white areas are done with the Crawlocke white, and I've gone ahead and primed all of the metal areas, or everything else, with the with black. That's Abaddon black. So I'll be back in just a sec with the next step. Okay, so for the cage here, I've left it on the sprue because I removed the first one and then realised that I'm going to have to do this in sub-assemblies. If we applied the cage to the guy, to the jailer, we're not going to be able to paint underneath it. Another problem is obviously holding them. That there, guys, be very careful with your chains. They are super flimsy here, and I did actually snap that off whilst priming that with the brush, so do be careful with them. But back to this, I realised that it would have been difficult holding this piece and painting it, so I'm painting it up on the sprue, and then I can just clip it off, neaten up those extra little bits. Obviously I've sanded down any mould lines that I can get to, but the clip points, I'll just file them down very gently and then paint them in the same way, and you won't notice it. So for all of the metal areas, I'm using some iron breaker and just giving this a good quick brush over the entire area. This doesn't fully coat it as clean as if you were being careful with it. You'll get a little bit of black in some shadow areas and things like that, but I feel it gives it a much better steel or iron type look to it. You know, we're going to throw Nuln Oil on this anyway, so as long as you get a good 90% coverage, 95% coverage, it will all look fine. Now for the large padlock, obviously the area that I'm doing here, I wanted silver, but the loop, the locking part, I wanted to be a little bit different, so I'll be doing that with Brazen Brass, I think it is. Nope, Screaming Bell. So Screaming Bell for that part, but the rest of it will be silver, with exception to the lock part of the where the keyhole is. I wanted that in the Screaming Bell as well, but at this point there you can see there I'm doing it in the silver, but I decided to go and do that with the Screaming Bell later on. All the chains are also done in iron breaker, as well as obviously the cage. So again, I'll get on with these bits and we'll come back in a bit. Right, so for all of the brass parts, I wanted them to stand out a little bit different from the iron breaker, so that we had a little bit of contrast between the two, and it wasn't just a sort of blue, white and silver ghost. So the bronze parts using the Screaming Bell are the ring for the key here, or the keys, which I actually go and change. I do these back to silver, and you will see why here. I wanted to do the key heads in this as well, and with the ring it was just too much of the same colour next to each other. They didn't stand out properly. So if you're following along with this, keep the ring silver and do these in the Screaming Bell, or reverse it, but I don't recommend having the two together. Like I say, it just didn't work out right, which is something to make sure you bear in mind when painting, that you do want something, you want your colours to contrast a little bit. You don't want them blending into each other. Think about what colours you're putting where. Anyway, next up we've got the cuff here. Also his head I will be doing in the Screaming Bell, as well as what I mentioned earlier with the padlock, the large padlock, the locking part of that, plus the part that it connects into, and then the padlock itself is the iron breaker. Also on his cage he has a few padlocks. I did them in this as well, just to make them stand out again from the cage a little bit. And also the hourglass that he has, I did in the same Screaming Bell for the little connecting loop on the top of that connects it to the chain, and the mounting part of the thing itself. So again, I'll get on with this and I'll catch you guys in a flash. Okay, so next up I'm going to take some Nuln Oil and straight from the pot So this isn't thinned down or anything. Just apply a nice wash over all of the metal areas. So that's anything done in Ironbreaker and anything done in the Screaming Bell. Obviously, with this piece on here, I'm able to do both sides at once, as I can lean it up against something and not worry about it touching a surface. Whereas things like the padlock and the other cage, part of the cage that you can see in the background there, because they're going to be flat on a surface, I'll put the oil on the top surface. Once that's dried, flip it over and do the same, and then obviously finish off with the sides, just to make sure that it's you know, fully covered but not sticking to anything. So you can see there exactly where I got that Screaming Bell. That's what I meant where I wanted it to stand out a bit. So if you are following along, you guys can see how we went with that. But like I say, a nice generous coat of non-oil over anything metal, and allow it to dry, and we can move on with the next step while that dries. Okay, so with the non-oil portions drying, we can move back onto the Jailor himself, and this is after about 3 layers of the thin down gloom going on. I'm now applying some neat Nighthaunt gloom, so this is straight from the pot, and I'll do this in about another 2 to 3 layers, but all I'm looking to do is cover sort of the top half of the Jailor, getting it darker towards his back, so the top third. So all I'm doing, obviously getting it in the recesses, pretty much over the entire model, and I'm trying to thin it towards the ends of the ghostly part, the trails, and allow that to thicken up a little bit more towards the his back, to try and get a smooth blend. I will be obviously adding some white over the top of this, so I'm not too worried at the minute about evenness, as long as we get a nice even coat on his back and sort of, like I say, the top third of the model. So again, that will be 2 or 3 layers, letting it fully dry between layers, and then we can move on with the next stage. Okay, so I've added some ceramite white to my wet palette there. Hopefully you can see the angle, and I'm mixing in some Nighthaunt gloom to about a 50-50 ratio, to get a thicker consistency, but a slightly paler blue. So if you can see that there, just try and get this in focus. There we go. So that's pretty much the colour that I'm looking for. Comparing it to the haunt there, you can see that it's a paler blue. So remove some of the excess, and then all I'm going to do is dry brush this over the bottom half of the model, and then slightly up onto the darker portion at the top. So this will be using a makeup brush. You can see here a little bit stained with some previous yellow paint. Do make sure you do clean these out. Like I say, that is a staining. Unfortunately, some of the staining does come out with the blue, and I end up with a slightly green tint. But when the next layer of dry brushing goes on, it's fine. But I do recommend using a fully clean dry brush for this. So yeah, we all make mistakes. Learn from mine. Clean brushes, guys, make sure they are fully clean. Luckily it doesn't have too bad a look for me, but obviously had I wanted this white, then I've pretty much ruined my model there. Okay, so with that badly done dry brush of what should have been blue, now green, I'm taking some pure Crawlocke white and a clean makeup brush, and I'm dry brushing again over this, concentrating towards the middle, towards the bottom on these sort of trailing off pieces, and obviously trying to fix up the yellow green mistake. but also getting that white blend from pure white at the bottom up into this Nighthaunt gloom up the top. So this will take a good 3 or 4 layers of dry brushing, but obviously do it to get it to how you want it. As I said, it was more of an, as Bob Ross would put it, happy accident that I had the green stain. I think it gives a little bit more of an eerie look to this. So if you would like to replicate that, don't clean your brushes. But no, do thoroughly clean your brushes, guys. You know, you don't want to mess up a good model by having a stained brush. So again, I'll get on with this, guys, and then we'll come back for the next steps. Okay, so I've now assembled the Jailor with all his parts there, as he is essentially finished. What I'm now doing is taking some Stormhost silver and just adding some highlights to obviously the metal parts. You know, certain chain links or parts of the chain links, the upper parts of the ring, the keys, edge highlighting all of the cage that's on his back, and obviously the edge of the padlock. This is just to give a nice sharp definition of highlight to the edge of everything. Now, some people, and in some cases I would have gone back over the Nuln Oil with maybe a dry brushing of the iron breaker, but I actually wanted that darker grimy look, so I've left the Nuln Oil on there without going over dry brushing to bring that silver back, and I'm using this Stormhost silver to pick off those edge highlights. So I'll do this, and I'll also dot in all of the studs around the model, obviously on the padlock and on the cage and things like that, and we'll come back and do the same thing with all of the brass areas. So I will catch you guys in a flash. Okay, so taking some Screaming Bell and doing the same thing with all of the bronze, brass, copper, brass things that, you know, whatever it is you want to call this colour. I suppose they're probably bronze, something like that, bronze or copper. But taking some of the Screaming Bell and again going edge highlighting all of these and adding some highlights to where the tops of the keys and the loop here and things like that would be, just to bring a little bit more of shine back to those areas. Okay, so for the hourglass here, all I've done is given it a thin coat of Stormhost silver, and this has given it a sort of metallic-y glass type sheen to it. And now I'm just adding a few dots of ceramite white just for some final highlight. And on top of that, or around that, I'm then using some Zandri dust and just dotting in what would be considered sand. It's not going to stand out a huge amount, but we don't want it to. We just want, you know, a little bit of colouring on that glass to show that it's got some sand in there. But I think the Stormhost silver thinned down has given it a nice sort of glass sort of sheen to it. And then obviously some more white on the back here just for those highlights. And that is the hourglass done in a nice simple tabletop ready fashion. Nothing overly complicated, just a quick bit of sand, quick bit of highlight, boom, done. For this part, we're going to take some Typhus Corrosion and apply this over any of the steel areas. So obviously this is going to be for our rust effect. So just taking blobs of it, blobbing it around anywhere where I think, you know, would look cool with a bit of rust on there. Leaving some of the original metal showing, rusting up parts. This will be done all over the cage, down the chains, the keys, a little bit on the grating that is just underneath him there. Now obviously the base, I've done that off camera. You guys are obviously going to do the bases your own ways. If you would like to see me doing the bases, then let me know down in the comments, and I'll maybe make a various basing tutorial video. Obviously let me know if that's something you guys would like to see. So I'll get on with this and we'll come back for the next stage once this has dried. Okay, so moving on to the bronze or brass parts. Now taking some Crawlocke oxide and applying this over everything that is to have some of this oxidization effect on it. So all I'm doing, nice big blobs of it, and just apply it all over. And then before this dries, all I do is take some paper towel and dab away, and what that'll do is remove the majority of the oxide, and that will leave it in the recesses and sort of in small patches and things like that. And it's at this point in the editing that I realise I hadn't recorded part of the rust effect step. All I did once the typhus corrosion had dried is taken a small dry brush and some riser rust and just brushed that, or dabbed it on in places that I wanted a little bit of heavier orange, over any of that typhus corrosion to give it that sort of orangey rust look. So where the typhus corrosion was, I would have dry brushed it, and then in a few places just sort of carefully sort of blobbed on a little bit more, not a thick blob or anything, just a little bit of a heavier coating of the riser rust. So you can see here now I'm just removing some of that Crawlocke oxide and just leaving some small amounts in the recesses. Anywhere that I feel I've removed too much, I'll just go back in with a small amount on the brush and paint it in a little bit more controlled, just to sort of thicken it up in some of the areas that I wanted it a little bit more but removed too much. And there we have him, guys, a tabletop ready Crawlocke the Jailor. So thank you ever so much for joining me for today's episode. If you enjoyed the video, please do hit that like button. If you're not already subscribed, please hit that subscription button and ding that little bell for notifications on future videos. And until next time, guys, in all the chaos that is going on in the world right now, take it safe, take it easy, and keep painting those minis.